Well, I'm glad to be here again. I think in just a few months from the time when we founded the Revolutionary Communist Party back in December, and already we can see how fast change in the world situation we have to deal with. I think for a lot of people this is extremely confusing, and we need to understand that. The pace of events has accelerated enormously. And for some time we've been raising the idea of a turning point in the world situation. It's like a storm is coming, and we are right in the middle of it. And we are living a turning point in the world situation that will define the next period. And as we expected, of course, the single element that is has provoked, unleashed this process, which of course comes a long way back. It's the initial impact of Trump's presidency. But of course, we should not fall in the trap that the mainstream media and the liberal establishment is kind of pushing. This is not the making of one individual. Of course, Trump is putting his fingerprint on the process, but this is the long-drawn result of tectonic shifts in world relations and the crisis of capitalism that we've been discussing and analyzing for some time. Even communists who are new to the organization, or they are, at their first event, they might have heard about this type of expressions, like tectonic shift. And what we mean by that is the result of a long-drawn process for decades of relative decline of US power, and I stress the word relative. And on the other hand, the rising power of China, and now we can say of Russia, which of course is increasing the frictions between imperialist powers on a world scale. Now, what we mean by saying that it is a relative decline of the US, you can see it, it's in front of you. You can measure US world preeminence by the impact that Trump is having on the world. I'm sure Macron or Merz or Starmer would love to be in that position. Of course, whatever they do is of a lesser consequence. So Trump is, in a way, and we will have to discuss more about to understand this process headed by Trump. But Trump is the attempt, his program is Make America Great Again. But Trump cannot turn the tide, it cannot restore the US as a superpower. And in fact, I think we can say that with his actions, Trump is accelerating this process. And this situation is really unlike any historical precedent. So we have to be careful in drawing historical analogies. And it is very important as a question of method to analyze what is the process. And of course, Trump's second presidency doesn't look so much like the first one. Not in the impact it is having. But unlike in 2016, as we noted before, Trump was ready for taking the initiative. He is enacting the Make America Great Again agenda in a very aggressive way. So of course this has sent shockwaves everywhere. Just imagine you're the Danish Prime Minister sitting in your office and thinking, oh, life is quite nice and quiet. Where should I go for lunch today? And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a shitstorm. That's the only way you can describe it. Where the president of the most powerful country in the world is saying, well, okay, I really need Greenland. And, regardless of what you can say, I will have it. Maybe even, if needed, we can take it. And the crazy thing about this is that, this type of behavior is exposing how fragile and how hypocritical is the world order of rules, so-called. Of course, this is regardless of whatever the Greenlanders want, which is probably not to be with Denmark, but also not to be under US domination. And then the next day he is attacking Canada, saying, well, you might as well join the United States as the 51st state. And then clashing with Mexico, slapping 25% tariffs because of this, of the control over the border and a number of other things. The threat to invade Panama and retake the control of the canal. In fact, China is not controlling the Panama Canal. That's obviously a lie. But we will come to an explanation of why these things are happening. And of course, very publicized, brutal deportations of immigrants, although the numbers are very, very low compared even to the Biden deportations. But the way they have carried out these deportations, humiliating, arresting, humiliating the people that have been deported, the use of the military, putting pressure, enormous pressure on countries throughout Latin America to take these deportees. The Panama Canal question, Mexico, and these deportations, the clash with Colombia's president, and so on. All these things are contributing to cause a steep rise, upheaval of anti-US sentiment throughout Latin America. We'll come back to this question of what is the design behind, let's say, the plan behind these type of actions. But of course, other things, very important things have been happening which are connected to Trump inauguration. The so-called ceasefire in Israel-Palestine. Well, I mean, it is a ceasefire, and it was enacted upon by Hamas and Israel in terms of exchange of prisoners and so on. But it was always in the hands of Israel to decide whether the way this ceasefire was to be applied. As in Lebanon, by the way. Israel, and with the backing of the United States, are the only arbiters of anything. And they're totally free to violate the ceasefire with no consequence. And this hasn't changed with Trump. If anything, it has become even more. The pressure behind and the support behind Israel's action has become more outspoken. But Trump needed a ceasefire. And you can see the power of the United States in the way they forced Netanyahu to go towards an agreement. A US envoy, Trump's envoy, not even officially nominated, goes to Israel and forces Netanyahu out of his holiday home. Literally took him by the ear, and they forced this deal to be signed. That, of course, is not of Netanyahu's liking. He will find ways, and he's already finding ways to make Trump's life complicated. But then we have, the ceasefire, of course, is the stranglehold over Gaza, and the population in Gaza is not relieved by the ceasefire. Because the aim is to expel as many Palestinians as possible from Gaza. And then we have the backing by Trump of the plan for the mass deportations from Gaza. To rebuild Gaza, but without the Palestinians. Of course, this is not viable. It's not something that can be done. But part of Trump's aims is that of pushing the regional powers, the reactionary Arab regimes of the region, in taking charge of organizing and carrying out the oppression of the Palestinians, together and in collaboration with Israel. So this was already the aim of the Abraham Accords that were signed in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. A process of normalization of Israel's position in relation to the powers in the area, like Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries, which was interrupted by the rise of the unified strike in Palestine in 2021. Yeah. Within Israel, in the green zone, outside of, in the occupied territories. Saudi Arabia was, never signed these accords, but was very close to doing that. And of course, whatever happened, the Israeli attack after 7th of October and the genocidal war against Gaza have made impossible for all these regimes, the Arab regimes, to follow this type of follow-up on these accords. All these regimes have enacted over the past 18 months the most vicious suppression of internal opposition, the most vicious repression of any attempt to solidarize with the plight of the Palestinian people. Thousands of youth have been arrested. They're rotting in jail in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt. And this is in order to contain the mass rage and the willingness to fight back in the youth and working class in the area. What Trump is doing is, by reiterating this plan today, is to push these countries to the edge. And these countries are all ticking time bombs. And we will see revolutionary movements developing in these countries, well, it's impossible to say exactly when, that will make the Arab revolutions of 2010-11 look like sort of dress rehearsal. But of course, events in the Middle East are momentarily obscured by bigger events and the impending world storm that we are witnessing. And I would say that the defining element, there are many at play, but the defining element that we should consider in order to understand what the world situation is today is the Ukraine war. And we have said many times that the Ukraine war was unnecessary from the point of view of the strategic interest of US imperialism. The main threat to US power in the world was not Russia, was not Europe, because part of the Ukraine war was undermining Europe, and quite successfully so, by the way. But it's always been China. And of course, the amount of resources, the amount of energy and put into backing up Ukraine has drained US imperialism. And the question is, to defend Ukraine for how long as it takes. All these slogans that were coming out of Biden's mouth have now turned into the opposite. Ukraine has been unceremoniously dropped like a sack of potatoes. And, with the Trump administration officials and Trump himself saying they brought this onto themselves. We've all seen the Trump-Zelensky clash on TV. It was, I don't know if it was accidental or staged, but it really expresses the shift in the situation. And Trump has opened open communication with Putin, with Russia, direct communication, and in fact negotiating a deal without Ukraine or European involvement. So the European Union powers and friendly Britain, they are just, kept out of the door. By the way, it is true that US aid to Ukraine was key, and the US shouldered quite a lot of this support from financial, military, intelligence, from all points of view. But Europe has paid a larger part of the bill. But of course, this is not something that will determine, the power relation that comes out of this. And to the European Union, of course, this is also part of Trump's policy, is to say, you freeloaders, you've been riding on our backs for quite a while, and from now on, you're on your own. And of course, this is something that is marking a sea change in the situation. This has rattled the European Union establishment. They're now in a panic mode. It's not just about the Ukraine, but it is a fact that Europe does not have military deterrence because they were relying on the United States to provide it. So it is true panic. And the attempts to build up this coalition of the willing to resolve the Ukraine, to support Ukraine, is a grotesque spectacle to see, these so-called powers meeting and agreeing, and then coming out of this meeting with all different interpretations, all heading in different directions. But it is a fact that the crisis of Europe goes beyond the European Union, but of course it's centered into the European Union. The crisis of Europe has reached a point of no return. And the only thing they agreed that is necessary, that they will pursue, they will do it, and find always around the rules, and it doesn't matter the rules, in fact, is rearmament. And here, I think we should notice all this, liberal kind of milieu, how quickly they jumped onto the militarism bandwagon. It's like they've always been like that. You can read, these articles analyzing and rundown of the military forces of this, that other country, how we're going to position ourselves, and so on media that in the past would have a kind of moralistic, pacifist, United Nations-y slant. So the European Union ruling classes are waking up very rudely to a reality that is not very, very reassuring. And they are trying to catch up with the lack of investment, with the lack of preparation for decades. And we have to understand this. This rearmament drive, it's global, and in Europe is particularly strong now. And this is forcing onto the ruling classes a new wave of austerity and cuts. And we have to be very careful in understanding this. The ruling class in Europe and everywhere, even in the United States, they have been doing whatever they could over the past 20 years to avoid a frontal clash with the working class. It goes back to 2008, but even before, this realization by the ruling classes that the working class has been becoming stronger and stronger. But yeah, in 2008, the bailouts and the huge expansion of public debt was because of an attempt, which was successful, to prevent the meltdown of the system, but also to prevent a revolution. And then, with the COVID pandemic, they did the same. Instead of passing the bill, let's say, onto the working class, which is what they're trying to do now. But we have to be clear, the situation hasn't changed. It's just that the crisis has developed further, and the capitalist class has no alternative than to go on the offensive. And this is a finished recipe for class struggle and revolutionary developments in the future. And also, this comes on the back of the experience of the last 15, 17 years, since 2008. It will literally be bombs instead of books, more barracks, more soldiers instead of hospitals, and so on. And this poses a question: who decides? It poses the question: who pays? And these are the answer, the attempt to answer this question is the driving force of a mass politicization. So we have to enter this period with confidence. So we have Merz now, who is a happy man. He has managed to get together an agreement to have this 1 trillion euro to play with. And then we have the European Union, who is kind of scrambling together all the cash they have. And they found 800 billion euros for rearmament. And of course, you have the industrialists, the capitalist class, who are kind of very, very happy about this turn in the situation. But the irony is that European industry is totally behind. And European rearmament now means to buy mostly US weapons. But of course, they want to raise military expenditure to 3%, 4%, 5% even of the GDP. But this is in a situation where most of the European countries are basically collapsing under their piled up debts. But they are totally delusional. They think, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, with a accounting trick, It doesn't count on the debt, so it doesn't exist. In fact, it's the continuation of the policies they've been doing, quantitative easing, printing money, but in the context of a much more unstable, much worse world situation. And then, of course, we have this drive towards a world trade war with Trump, who said he didn't hide his inclinations. Tariff, what a lovely word. So it's part of, as the press has defined, transactional approach towards world politics. But it is mainly, if you noticed, it's mainly directed towards the closest allies. And of course China, for a measure. But the first wave of attacks and the first shots in this trade war are shot against the closest allies. Canada and Mexico, by the way, Trump did that already in 2016. It was a smaller scale and quicker, but he basically appended the NAFTA agreement, the free trade agreement, and forced Canada and Mexico to sign a more favorable agreement for the United States. So yeah, these tariffs announced on Truth Social on midnight of Saturday, effective the next day, on Canada, on Mexico, on the UK, on Europe. It's not been much in the media, but also Japan has been attacked. Yeah, of course, but the thing is that regardless whether these tariffs are going to stay or are going to be removed at some point, the impact of this type of policy is enormous. It has an impact in destabilizing the sphere of influence of the United States. Well, Trump wasn't joking when he said that Canada could be the 51st state of the United States. In fact, the dependence of Canada on trade with the US and integration of Canada's and US economy is very advanced. US is the biggest trade partner by far, both Canada and Mexico. And trade makes up 73% of Canadian GDP and 67% of Mexican GDP. So of course, it is easy for the United States to bully into submission a country that is in fact dependent. And that's one of the reasons why Trump is doing this and being so violently, confrontational with the closest allies. Yeah, this is to force more favorable terms of trade for the US, and this is make America great again at the expense of the rest of the world. But of course, I mean, it can work with Canada, it can work with Mexico, although there are long-term consequences for these type of policies. But this type of tactic is working a lot less in relation to countries that either have the strength or the muscle to counter, like China, or are less dependent on the US. Well, for example, Russia is not dependent on the US. They had to become independent. So this is creating a situation where the US relative decline is reaching a point where for a number of countries it is becoming more important to trade with China than with the US. And the US is becoming relatively less important on the world market. So by abusing the position of power, which is still relevant, Trump is creating the conditions for this process to accelerate, for the process of withdrawal of the United States from the world market to accelerate. So for example, in 2017, US trade, import and exports represented 6.5% of the world economy. And now it's 5.2. So this process is already there. It's not Trump who has created this. Yeah, but these policies are going to accelerate it. An article on Foreign Affairs, for example, concludes that for many US allies, a smaller presence in the US market has ceased to be an economically existential threat. And then they continue. Instead of regaining US dominance, there is a significant possibility that his actions will further accelerate the decline of American global influence, both in the economy and in other realms. So China, which is at the center of this power struggle between the main imperialist powers. China is hit by sanctions, by tariffs rather than sanctions. I lost count. I mean, it was started by Trump's first presidency, then Biden doubled on, and there was already quite a steep jungle of regulations and limitations and tariffs on imports from China. I think it was Biden to introduce 100% tariff on electric vehicles. It's just a continuation, intensification of an ongoing trade conflict that now is developing into could develop into all-out war. But China is a country that has leverage and can fight back. For example, they kind of limited the export of important minerals that are key for any production of advanced technological production in the United States, the rare earths, minerals, metals, and so on. So they hold, I wouldn't say a monopoly, but almost a monopoly. And so they can close the tap. That's why also, from the point of view of Trump, is so important and strategic to get Greenland or Ukraine or I don't know what. But there is one side of these tariffs that we need to understand. Tariffs are just like putting additional cost on selling products in a certain market like the United States. And sanctions like limitations of export, like what Biden did with China, for example, limiting the amount of chips that could be exported to China and the quality of these chips. NVIDIA and other chip producers, they have a separate line producing lower quality chips for exporting to China. But this forced China to develop internally these resources. So now they have a chip industry that is as advanced as the Americans. So while the tech giants in America were developing artificial intelligence based on the amount of chips eating up so much energy and having unlimited resources from this point of view. The Chinese were thinking, is that really necessary? Maybe we can do the same things using less energy, using less chips, because we don't have them. So we saw, for example, this shock that was provoked by the realization on part of U.S. tech sector that China was actually not just behind them, they were more advanced. They've caught up with a bang with DeepSeek, being not exactly at the same level, but being comparable with other artificial intelligence developed in the United States, but using a lot less resources, being a lot less expensive to develop, and allowing them a lot more score for improvement. By the way, this is happening also in the pharmaceutical industry, where now China is like the biggest developer of new medicines in the world. It's not just incremental innovation, it's proper innovation, and so on. And we see this in electric vehicles, which now German car makers are basically a competitor that is capable of producing better quality cars for cheaper. And basically they feel they are outcompeted by China. That's the reality. So of course, this is just to highlight how Trump's policy cannot resolve this. And the real clash between the United States and China is yet to begin. This is building up towards a global trade war. In a situation where world capitalism is already on the edge of a recession, and in fact never really recovered from 2008. And as we analyzed at the time, we explained that nationalism, protectionist tendencies, and so on, if blown up to a global trade war, that would cause a depression. And meanwhile, even uncertainty, which is the trademark of Trump, is already having an economic impact negative. But there are very important consequences of what is happening from the point of view of global balance of forces. Well, let's say that the balance of forces that held up the world balance, the world equilibrium that came out of the Second World War, already suffered quite a big change with the collapse of Stalinism. But now it has literally been ripped apart. The West, the concept of West, I don't think it makes any sense anymore. And this was recognized by some of the capitalist strategists. For example, there was quite an interesting article. The title is better than the article, to be honest. But quite an interesting article by Martin Wolf on the Financial Times. The title was, "The US is now the enemy of the West." And of course, I mean, it's a reckoning that is coming. And international relations set up after the Second World War are being uprooted along with their institutions. Think about the damage done to the credibility of the United Nations by the Israel-Palestine conflict. By the way, Israel is actively killing United Nations officials. Is that provoking any consequence? I can't see that. Netanyahu is indicted by the International Court, Criminal Court. Governments throughout Europe are saying, well, doesn't matter. You can come, we're not going to arrest you. So yeah, rules that they themselves set are violated. Trump, one of the first things he's done is executive orders. Fever was to withdraw from the World Health Organization. And of course, organizations like the World Trade Organization and so on have already been undermined in the past 15 years. And even NATO, which is not, it is part of the post-war setup. Even NATO is at the center of this earthquake, and the possibility of US withdrawing from NATO is quite possible. But I think the point is also, even if they don't withdraw, would anyone trust the defense guarantee of the NATO treaty that the United States will step in to defend your country if it's attacked? This is very difficult for, it's exposing everything that, the liberal order or the left is using, let's say, as a fig leaf to cover for their responsibilities. It's making it totally impossible to pursue. This bonfire of the international rule-based order that we've seen witnessed over the past few years is bringing to the fore the reality of naked imperialist big power politics. This is something unprecedented. I mean, of course, if you wanted to see it, you could see it even before. But this is something unprecedented for the past 80 years. So the reality of today's world is the same as before, only the mystification of this reality is kind of torn. With the words of Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. And rules are torn if they're not consistent with the interest of the moment, not even of the ruling class, but of the moment. So this is also reinforced by the decisions taken by Trump to snuff out, because I think that's what he's doing, US soft power in the world. For example, canceling US aid. By the way, this is the same thing that Starmer is doing in Britain. It's exactly the same thing. Only Trump is, more vocal about it. And some more sane individuals in the ruling class are saying, no, but wait, this means that a lot of the stuff we were doing behind the scenes, covert operations, all sorts of spying and so on, which is done through all this aid, well, we can't do it anymore. So, in fact, I mean, of course, all these things will continue as long as it suits them, but the pretense is destroyed. So what we're seeing is a crisis in world relations that is now provoking and feeding into a deeper economic crisis and depression, and vice versa. And I mean, it's incredible how powerful is the ability of the ruling class to basically deceive themselves. But if we look a little bit back and think, how did we get there here, I mean, to the point we are, in terms of the crisis of capitalism. And I think it would be fair to say that it's the long crisis that has begun in 2008. This is what we call organic crisis of capitalism. A situation where anything the ruling class can come up to, and it can be big changes in their economic policies, in their social policies, anything they can come up to, in order to avoid an immediate crisis, is preparing the next one. So in order to prevent the meltdown of the system and prevent revolution, back in 2008, they unleashed all the liquidity they could put together into the system with the bailouts. So it was the states, the so vilified states, that were the cause of every problem. Was the states who saved capitalism. But then, because the state had to intervene, as taking over all this junk and bad debt and created by speculation, the question of who pays was posed. And you see, it's the same question that is posed now with austerity. This was the question underlying the growing instability of all capitalist regimes since 2008. In fact, the struggle against austerity was the real moment when the class struggle started to pick up on a world scale. So austerity was the first attempt by the capitalist class to pass the bill on to the working class. And at the time we were saying this very simple way of explaining the relationship between what the ruling classes were doing and the consequences they were provoking. And it was this idea that the attempt by the ruling class to re-establish the economic equilibrium after the crisis in 2008, the bailouts and so on, to go back to normal. To do that through austerity would have necessarily undermined the social and political stability of the system. And we have seen the ruling classes go from one side to the other, empirically trying to find their ways back to normality. And by doing that, they have provoked even more instability. And it was also true on the other, it worked also the other way. Any attempt to stabilize the political and social base of capitalism by compromising undermined the economic equilibrium. And if we need to look at this process if we want to understand really what Trump represents and similar phenomena, because it's the process of that involves the masses for the first time, politicized the masses throughout capitalism everywhere. We saw a growing wave of mass struggle and radicalization developing throughout the decade. And austerity was a central thing revolving around which this mass struggle was being organized, forced, let's say. And then we had the pandemic cutting across this process that was reaching a revolutionary point in 2019. But again, the ruling class has attempted to use every tools at their disposal to contain, to prevent a revolutionary wave to explode. But we have to understand that the key of that process that explains what we're seeing now is the failure, the utter bankruptcy, political bankruptcy of the leadership of the reformists, left reformists, right reformists, mass organizations of the working class, the trade unions. A few years ago, we were using a lot this slogan, which is the crisis of capitalism is the crisis of reformism. Now, you see this graphically explained and exposed. You can study the case of Britain and look at the Labour government, which is basically carrying out austerity policies against the poorest section of society. So yeah, and you see also how impregnable it is from any pressure coming from the working class. It's they're entrenched in defending to their last drop of blood, capitalism. It's so, you know, the rise of these right-wing populist demagogues that we see, you know, around the world is part of this picture. They are different. Of course, they come from different backgrounds and reflect the personalities also involved. But they have something in common. One is that they are perceived or seen as against the establishment. The establishment is represented by this liberal capitalist and kind of left-leaning liberals bloc. It also represents the anger that is affecting large layers of society today and large layers of the working class. It is an indication of the erosion of the legitimacy of bourgeois democracy and the institutions of bourgeois democracy, all of them. And on top of that, there is this feeling of betrayal on part of the left. Failure and betrayal, both. The failure in all the movements, and the failure in every time the left has been called into government and what they've done. It's the crisis of capitalism is the crisis of reformism, and we see it. We see it by studying the process in Greece, for example, what happened with Syriza, or what happened with Podemos in Spain, the enormous enthusiasm around these organizations. Or Corbyn and the Labour Party in Britain before the present state, let's say. I mean, it was different from the point of view of the class nature of the party who were affected by it, but America is a special place, and it's similar process happening around Bernie Sanders. There are many, many more of these examples we can make. But all of them basically come down to crunch time when the crisis is forcing the leadership of these organizations to capitulate or betray. At the same time, you have the crisis of confidence in the system, you have the crisis of confidence in the organizations, traditional organizations of the working class. For many, many years, all this has been, you know, crunched together, has been grinded. This is the basis for the rise of these right-wing populist movements. Of course, we have figures who have come to power. They've been somehow tested, like Trump himself, Bolsonaro, Modi. But of course, this hasn't resolved the question because the lack of an alternative. In fact, if you want to understand Trump's victory, which has been a real victory, not like, the electoral mechanism, a minority voted for Trump. No, the majority voted for Trump. Is the accumulated rage against the system that is identified with the Democrats. And it's like a condemnation of the role of the reformists, left reformists, right-wing reformists, all of them. The fact that a billionaire like Trump is seen as an anti-establishment figure and the alternative to the establishment in a way. This is a very important point because we need to understand that, and we need to understand how this is affecting the working class. This is not fascism. It's just a very distorted manifestation of this anger that is developing and the lack of an alternative. Where is the alternative? When there is any alternative, it kind of gets some response, like we've seen here in the elections with Die Linke. But is Die Linke an alternative? It's not. The problem is, once they're tested, the faults of their approach, the faults of being, not having an alternative to capitalism, basically, comes to the fore. This has nothing to do with the subjective will of Trump. He would like to be king, emperor, Bonaparte, whatever puts him at the center of the stage, let's say. But it has a lot to do with the balance of forces between the classes in each country and on a world scale. But of course, this is the cry of the liberals today. This is, the beginning of fascism. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez that remembered one morning that she's supposed to be left-wing. said that we are on the eve of an authoritarian administration. This is what 21st century fascism is starting to look like. This is nothing to do with fascism. It is a reactionary phenomenon, but it is based on it's based on the crisis of credibility of the system and the mounting rage of the working class. And the Trump movement is not going to disappear in the next 2 months because of its internal contradictions. It's going to be a factor for a while. But eventually it will break up along class lines because of the policies that Trump will carry out, which are policies to protect the interest of the rich and powerful, of himself, of course, and his friends. And he will not, his policies will not provoke a new renaissance of the utopian America he has in mind. If we want to understand the real mood, we have to look at the reactions to the Mangione phenomenon. Pretty sure that there are a lot of Trump supporters who are also very sympathetic towards Mangione. It is reflecting this mood of growing hatred for the establishment, the super rich, the capitalists. This is the root of this process. That is why it's so important from our point of view. We are a small organization, we are a small force, but it is a life and death question not to be seen as part of this leftish, United Nations-y, liberal. We need to be very clear about our revolutionary politics. This is still the core of the establishment. This is what working class people and youth see as the rotten, representation of what is worst in capitalism. So we are approaching a very defining period. This will have enormous impact on consciousness. But of course, how do you stop this? It's normal. It's what we've seen also in relation to the struggle against Israel's genocidal war. Is it enough just to, protest, demonstrate? Of course, this is the first step. But there is a dynamic, a learning process. A lot of people, working class people, are thinking this struggle is not going to be an easy one. But the crisis of the system is basically creating the conditions for this struggle to be unavoidable. It cannot be postponed for the infinity. Now they're pursuing rearmament. Again, they will expand public debts. They will attempt to pass on the bill to the working class and the youth. And this will provoke a reaction. In this process, we will see a new layer or a new vanguard being formed. It will be a very convulsive period. There will be moments of euphoria in terms of mass mobilizations, like we're seeing, for example, even now in the Balkans. Like, for example, in Serbia with the anti-Vučić movement. It's quite a massive movement, and in spite of having no leadership in terms of a revolutionary party, they are learning through the process of the struggle. And this is the challenge we have because, the mass of the youth, the mass of the working class learn through experience. It's not because we go there with a manual and say, okay, first step, you set up a Soviet. That's the way you organize a Soviet. Then you create a dual power situation, then all power to the Soviet. In fact, in all the revolutionary movements, organs of power emerge from the movement before even the consciousness that is necessary and what that represents in terms of dual power. So they, as a rule, I would say, when you have the development of mass organs of power in a way, they come from not a conscious effort. By themselves, these organs of power that are emerging when there are revolutionary movements are not a solution to the question of dual power. Even the Soviets, well, they expressed a provisional government which was for the continuation of the war. It was a bourgeois government, in fact, the provisional government. The existence of these organs is a condition for a transition, but it's not the transition itself. I'm talking about this because, for example, in Serbia now we have these plenums, which are not Soviets. It's confined now to the youth, to the students and so on, but now they're spreading. They're becoming organized also in the workplaces. There is an appeal to generalize them. But the question of power can only be resolved by the presence of a revolutionary party. So the understanding of what is the context that we are intervening in, this discussion about perspectives, is a necessary step in order to get to organize this revolutionary party. So to build a strong enough organization that can connect with these layers that are looking for a revolutionary solution. This is the task for us today. Thank you.